And I believe I hit all the steps this time around, so I'm very inordinately proud of myself. So good evening. My name is Nelda Schulte.
I'm Joe.
And my online business is neldaschulte.com, suspiciously the same as the sign behind me, the banner sign behind me. And I started it because it's dedicated to helping property investors and landlords build the foundation that they need to build a profitable real estate business. And the reason I do this is because when I started buying real estate, once I had a rental property, I had no idea what to do with it. And I made all kinds of mistakes, which, as you know, in real estate can cost you thousands of dollars. And it certainly cost me thousands of dollars. So I want to help landlords and property investors avoid these pitfalls with both free and affordable resources, which I offer on my website. Enough about me. Tonight's topic is how to avoid and or deal with tenants who take you to the RTDRS, which is the abbreviation for the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service, residential service. And I chose this topic because if you own a rental property or you own rental properties over a number of years, there's a really good chance that you could be taken to the RTDRS by a tenant.
You will be.
And in this case, it's really good to know from an expert like Rob Bonin what to do. And so we're joined tonight by our special guest, Robert Bonin of Red Deer Recoveries. Robert owns and runs Red Deer Recoveries, which does both tenant and landlord representation as an agent within the provincial courts, and the RTDRS, which is always a mouthful. I'm always worried I got the acronym letters the wrong way around here. And Rob's mantra is that we look for reasonable solutions and resolutions for everyone involved. Rob comes from a property management background, and I don't think there's anything he hasn't seen with 500 doors. So please help me welcome Rob. And Rob, thank you so much for joining us. So Rob, why did you decide, this isn't on our question list, but I'm curious, why did you decide to get out of property management and go into the dispute part of it? You would think that that would be kind of painful for you.
Well, I always did my own RTDRS hearings and provincial courts. I didn't really use the RTDRS much 10, 15 years ago because it was really in its early stages and it was a real shambles. But one thing the pandemic has done is it's really streamlined online services through Service Alberta, some not so good, some better than others, but overall we're still improving every day. And with the page that we run with 3,000 plus members, we're really putting a lot of influence to get those changes that benefit landlords. So, I mean, I saw more of an opportunity to share my knowledge with the public, whether it be through online courses, in-person speaking events, and such like yourself. I want to be able to help landlords avoid all the pitfalls or a large percentage of them, and not just because of thousands of dollars, but nowadays it's looking at tens of thousands of dollars. And it's just not affordable. There's just too many landlords just tossing their hats in and walking away. And that's not really fair to anyone, because all it does is it resells the property and raises the market value more for rentals, which makes it harder for everyone in the long run.
And you take a big risk being a landlord anyway. You take a big risk buying an investment property. And it just pains me when things don't pay off for people, or at least they can't get back on track again. So I'm really glad you're doing this. I think that's great. So I'll just launch in then with like the real questions that you wanted to be asked. So why hire representation?
Well, be it the provincial court or the RTDRS, you're entrusting a decision to do your own representation for something that can be worth anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. So the difference could be, you're trying to, if it's just a simple termination, the difference between doing it yourself and getting a professional to do it would be the difference between having them out in a week or two, or 2 or 3 months. The pandemic has made it so tenants, the ball's in their court all the time. You have to fight to win every time. Then there's the odd landlord, maybe 1 in 50, that does it themselves. It's not a professional tenant. You've got a pro landlord arbitrator out of the 17, or rarer judge that might favor you. But at the end of the day, they're looking for what's fair for both parties. A judge will always tell you at the start, neither party's going to like the decision I make, because he's looking at what's the most fair solution. So when you're hiring someone to represent you, that's got the experience, the time invested into doing it, you're hiring someone that's going to get the best resolution for you. not for the other party involved, for you, whether it be a dollar value or a quick termination or police involved or bailiffs involved. The 25 years experience in this speaks volumes.
Yeah, it sure does. So my question is always, what's fair? You know, does that mean each party has to give something up? The tenant has to give something up and the landlord has to give something up when they go to the RTDRS? Or
A lot of times landlords don't, you know, I've seen landlords come to me after an eviction and I've had to redo the whole thing. Or I've seen a landlord file on themselves and then the tenant files something back and they're like, oh my God, I've got a professional tenant on my hand.
oh
They know
boy.
what they're doing. They'll ask, a professional tenant could ask for an adjournment based on COVID and no proof is required.
Oh boy.
Bad service, the improperly filed documents, you pick the wrong legislation to put all your hats in. I see landlords making mistakes all the time. Like you said, you have to learn the hard way. When I open up a hearing, I take credit for their mistakes. I say right off the bat, this was an error. We've rectified it. It won't happen again. But I put it right out there for the hearing officer or the judge to find out what it's about so it can't be used against us. And vice versa, when I'm even doing tenant representation, probably 95% of my clients are landlords, but there's probably about once every couple months, I'll get a tenant come to me and I see a really shady landlord that's making it look bad for everyone, realtors, investors, people like yourself, and I make sure that they're held accountable.
That's great.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I've actually never recommended that people do their own RTDRS court cases or civil court cases. I always recommend you go to a professional, whether it's an eviction service or your service, simply because every time you file legal paperwork, if you don't cross your T's and dot your I's and your lowercase j's, it gets kicked back. You get to start all over again. Or if you make a mistake, you're discredited. So I don't like to have to redo things again and again. If I'm going to do something once, that's enough for me, especially if it was something that would be as gut wrenching as this, because who wants to go to court? Nobody, unless you're a lawyer or you. So I would like to have it done right the first time and not think, oh, now I have to go back and do it all over again and this time remedy my errors.
And there's also the possibility of getting a faster result so that you can rent your property again and start seeing income. Whereas if you're having a fight to get a tenant out, that could be a couple months of lost rent.
Yeah.
And potentially more damages.
Yeah, having somebody live in your property who isn't paying and they're rubbing your nose in it every month. That's not fun.
Well, I could tell you right now, people come to see me when they're hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
When the things have gotten so bad, and that's okay. I mean, they suddenly realize they're in the deep end and they're drowning. That's when they come to see me. So I came up with a really good parody on why you should hire an agent. And it's real simple. You're hemorrhaging. You've suddenly discovered that your appendix has blown. So what do? Do you go see a doctor and get it fixed, get it taken out? Or do you phone a doctor and ask for advice on how to do it yourself? You know, it's a really,
you're an astronaut.
That's right.
You know,
it's a really clear picture. I mean, I see people constantly post, oh, well, I'll just use it. I'll just do this as a learning curve. They don't realize that there's just in each city. I mean, Red Deer has 6 different judges, so 6 different personalities, 6 different political agendas. So you need to know all of that before you even start. So a lot of times you don't even know what your game plan is until you see the arbitrator. I walked into a hearing or a court when I'm like, oh no, worst judge, worst hearing officer for this particular circumstances. Oh, strategies completely changed, and you have to know how to do that on the fly. And there's 17 hearing officers in Alberta alone. So you've got 17 different personalities, 17 different political agendas, 17 different religious affiliations. It all plays a factor because this person makes a court binding decision that's registered in Court of Queen's Bench. So they have the authority to do anything they want. And that's a big crapshoot to learn as you go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's real estate is not an area I like learning too much as I go. When I started, I did thought, oh, well, you know, I had worked as a leasing agent part-time for a couple of organizations, but I didn't go through the whole process. I also didn't have any education with the RTA or I didn't really know my landlord and tenant laws. So, I was just kind of a babe in the woods until I actually got into it, started having problems. And then I realized, hey, I better learn some of this stuff if I'm going to keep going, which I wanted to do. Because I always tell people, once you've made a mistake, that's not the time to pack it in and throw it away. That is the time to move forward, because now you've learned from it. You're not going to make that mistake again.
Yep.
So next question.
So if you have a tenant and you need them out as quick as possible, what's your approach?
Well, it all depends on the circumstances. What I always ask when somebody calls me is, they all want to tell me a 4-hour story, but of course I'm doing a consult, so I try and get it down to 15 minutes. I just need the nitty gritty. What's going on? Do they owe rent? Has there been a conflict? Have you already given them notice? What's the correspondence been? I mean, the most common, of course, is not paying rent.
Right.
So if it's, let's look at today, it's October 5th. If a landlord calls me and says, look, I've got this tenant that hasn't paid October's rent, they've been late every month, 2 weeks further. I say how many times they've been done. So I get all that information. I had one at 5:30 on the way home on the cell phone. And I just said, you know what, send me this, and this. I will file it in the morning. I'll get a date somewhere in November. Because of the circumstances and the substantial damages going on, I'm going to file some paperwork that's going to get me an abridgment of service. I might have a hearing on Monday or Tuesday, probably have them out the following Friday. And the guy was just like, really?
That's
But I
really
thought
fast.
the RTDRS was 6-8 weeks away. And I'm like, yes, for things that are not high priority. But that's when you have to know how to make the argument and make the claim based on evidence, because you have to supply some kind of evidence to support it on why this should be heard sooner than later.
So how long have you been doing this? Because all the judges.
I think my first court case was 1994, I believe. And my mother worked.
You were 10 years old at the time. What?
No. I'm in my 40s, late 40s again. But no, my mother worked in the courthouse as a bailiff or a sheriff or whatever you want to refer them to as. But I just took a liking to the law. I spent a lot of time in the library researching. I got into real estate. It was just a natural evolving to it. Fought my first case probably with a residential tenancy matter in the late 90s. By the time 2005 rolled around, I was probably 50 of my own cases and 150 of other people's cases. And it just rolled into that. I surpassed 1,000 cases sometime last year.
Wow.
Huh.
So we had a paralegal on our last Ask Nelda Almost Anything, and she represents a lot of, she's in Ontario, and she represents a lot of her clients in court. And she had something very similar to what you're saying. She said, you need to know the judge's personalities, and she runs a paralegal business. So they, when they have spare time, it's part of their protocol, the business protocols for the staff to go in and get familiar with the different judges.
Sit down and listen to the cases that are going on.
Yeah, and just see how the judges rule, why they rule that way, so that they can put together their strategy when they're doing a case.
Oh, you're completely right. I mean, I had a new judge in last year in Calgary, and he just didn't like gingers. I can tell you right now, the guy did not like redheads.
Really?
And I turned to my client and said, shh, be quiet, don't say a word. The judge is grumpy about something. He has not taken a shine to me at all. He's brandishing me as a target. Let the judge go on a rampage here and don't answer anything yes or no. It was like an uphill battle to win the case, because for some reason that judge just took an instant dislike to me. He had never met me. I did everything correct. I was respectful in every matter, followed every court protocol. But you know what? Somebody could just wake up on the wrong side of the bed. It could be a judge you love. Then you get wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, and you need to know when to fold them. Like, whoop, nope, we're not asking for 4,000. We're only asking for 2,000. And I, maybe in damages. And I've had the landlord say, well, why? I thought we could have got 4. Well, we could have if we would have gotten anybody else but this guy in a bad mood. So better 2,000 than nothing for a judgment toward a tenant. You have to know how to read the room, read the judge, his personality or her personality. I mean, I had an arbitrator from the RTDRS not 6 weeks ago. During the hearing, I was putting across the reason that the tenant was being evicted, a female tenant upstairs, is because she was using her, what would you call that? Her sexual wiles to extort money from the downstairs tenants. And I had 3 men in less than a year that gave up their security deposits to move out of there.
Wow.
And when I brought this in, and I brought one witness in, the existing tenant, I was going to bring the other witness in. The female judge or arbitrator with the RTDRS got very upset with me. And her words were, "Oh, I feel personally offended as a woman that you would dare imply this kind of thing." And I says, well, I said, "I'm really sorry that you're offended, but that doesn't change the facts. I have 2 more witnesses to corroborate this." She wouldn't let me produce the 2 more witnesses.
Wow.
And she was discounting what he said. So after we finished the case, the evidence, I basically finished a closing statement by, "You should know if you rule against me and this tenant is not terminated at the end of the month, I'll be appealing this today in Court of Queen's Bench, benched on your one simple phrase, I feel offended as a woman," because she's no longer impartial, which means it's an instant appeal in a Queen's Bench.
Okay.
And she said it on the record. And she's like, "I'm going to take a recess." And she went to go talk to her boss. And she came back and she said I was perfectly right, and that the eviction would be in 2.5 weeks. And there was all the conditions in the world. She wasn't happy about it, but she knew I was right. And she had to rule on the side of law because she was giving me
because you knew what you were talking about and she actually didn't. But
exactly. And
what
that does,
background do these judges? They're not judges. They're called arbitrators.
they're called hearing officers with the
Hearing
RTDRS. Yeah.
What background do the hearing officers have in Alberta? Because I know in BC they actually have to be judges.
Nope, the hearing officers, sometimes they're social workers with 20 years experience that took a course on arbitration. Sometimes they're former lawyers, sometimes they're former prosecutors. My opinion is I'm sure they would rather be a judge in a courtroom, but this was the next step for them.
This is the
They
cards
wanted
they're
A
dealt.
and they got B.
Well,
So I remember
some of them
talking
are
to,
quite happy with the role, but you can tell some of them aren't.
Yeah.
so we
You know,
we had this guy talking to us a while ago, and he said that in a lot of cases, especially with pets, like you can move a pet into a property in spite of the fact that your lease says no pets. But in a lot of cases, the judges themselves or the arbitrators are pet owners, and so they're going to side with the tenant. Even though the lease says no pets, they're going to say, well, we have dogs, we have cats. We would not rule against you for the same reason, you know.
Well, and you do make a valid point there, but I can tell you from experience that if you've got a judge that's leaning toward that or hearing officer, I know techniques to turn that completely around by using the legislation, and I get to use other cases as examples, and I'll have them handy. If it's about a pet, I'll always have 2 or 3 of my own handy there with the case number, and I'll make the argument that if we need to put this in, I'll have the matter set aside for 10 minutes while I send in the case studies from former cases about pets. Because at the end of the day, if it's in your lease and you acted on it the minute that you found out about it, you may not be able to evict it. Maybe during the pandemic, the judge feels a bit sorry for them. They're feeling this is a light breach. Great, they can stay. And then I make a condition over the next 3 months that there's no pets, there's no noise, they must keep the peace, the rent must be paid upon. So it's a 2-page order. The first page is they can stay, but the second page is they have substantially breached it, and there's a pile of conditions that we've added on to this order. So if the pet's not gone by tomorrow and it comes back, or there's any more of these issues, I get to enforce an eviction.
Oh, okay. And
So-
see, that's something I wouldn't know how to do because I've never done that before. And that's something where you really need to know the letter of the law to know what you can do.
Well, yeah, if I read a room, whether it be a courtroom or a hearing process, and I read the room that we're not getting 100% of what we want. Maybe we're getting 75%. I'm going to look for a middle ground. Well, we're going to get more like 85, 90, because even though we didn't get the termination when we wanted it, I'm going to get a pile of conditions based on their breaches added to the order. So over maybe the 5 or 6 weeks they're getting to stay there, if they even, well, the word fart wrong as per the order, I can enforce an eviction in 3 days with a mailer. And I have.
Oh, that's great.
I've done that where I had one for a really good client in Red Deer here. Her and her husband came to me. they played the race card, which is really sad. It happens. They felt they were being picked on because of their color of their skin. The tenants did. And we ended up with an eviction mid-July, but it wasn't going to take place until the end of September. And I said, okay, well, the conditions are the store needs to be fixed. The yard needs to be brought up to code. They have to keep the peace. That means no more police visits, no more this, no more that. It was a week later and I had the cops there. And then the landlord also informed me that they had they stopped paying for their water. They took it out of their name. So I had it back in the hearing room and like next day, like an emergency hearing, and boom, suddenly the order is for 2 weeks from now. Now the arbitrator, again, it didn't go my way. And I got a 10-week eviction, but I put all these conditions in there and she has to, because those are the breaches. Suddenly a week later, we're back in front of the same hearing officer that should have ruled in my favor. And here we are because the hearing officer messed up and we're having to get a week eviction now. So I went on Monday, I had the eviction for Friday. So I still got the desired result in 2 weeks. It just took a little more effort to get it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I bet the landlords were pretty happy about that then.
Yeah, now we're trying to sue them for damages. Now that gets a little more intricate, but I'm going to give them their maximum dollar.
Well, good for you. That's great. Good to have you in their court.
How hard is it to actually sue the people for damages after they're gone?
Not hard. If you know what you're doing and you've already put your service requirements into the order, because you leave the case file open so we can reapply and all the same conditions are there. And I make sure that we get an email and a phone number. And if they don't want to give their address, the arbitrator or judge will make them give an email for service. But you have to know how to ask the judge or the hearing officer for that in a way that's within the legislation and the scope of the law.
Oh, okay.
You just can't say, I want their email.
Yeah.
you have to build up to it. You almost have to play a game.
Okay.
You're playing a defensive game, and when you get the opportunity to go offensive, you do. I mean, I had a hearing yesterday that I actually used the word ludicrous for the first time in a hearing in 25 years. I said to the hearing officer, this is absolutely ludicrous. This woman is a prime example of an overholding tenant. She's admitted to it. She hasn't paid rent in 3 months. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She hasn't provided any evidence, and I want her gone. End of story. And there's no way that in any courtroom would I get anything less than a Friday possession. And there was about a 10-second pause, and the arbitrator, she asked if the tenant had anything to add, and she bitched about this and bitched about that. And then she said, I don't like the fact that they served my documents on the door. And the arbitrator jumped in, well, that's required by law. So too bad you don't like it. That's what the law is. She didn't like a lot of things.
Yeah.
She even bitched in the trial that a real estate agent walked in on her when she was naked. And I said, well, did he give you proper notice? Well, yeah, he said he was coming by at 3 o'clock, and then he just walked in. I'm like, why would you have been walking around naked if you knew he was coming at 3 o'clock for so long? And then I said out loud, did you phone the police? Well, no. Did you phone the real estate board? Well, no. Well, did you phone the guy's broker to get him in trouble? Well, no, it wasn't that serious. Well, then why are we bringing it up in the hearing? Like she gave me all the ammunition that I needed. And she just kept on digging herself a hole. So finally, the arbitrator just said, yeah, as Mr. Bonin said, 3 months rent, judgment, costs today for the hearing and the agent fees. And how does Friday at noon sound for your clients, Mr. Bonin? And I said, well, my clients aren't even here, but I'm sure they'll be thrilled when I call them in 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm happy to hear that outcome. So you had mentioned something when we talked privately about how to better communicate with your neighbors. Why did you bring that up, and why would that be important?
Well, if you own a property or you're running a business, because that's what a property is.
Yes.
If you're going to run a business, you need to get along with your neighbors. Trust me, you don't want that one neighbor. I've had it. Even in a commercial setting, you don't want that one neighbor because they'll mess with your business. They'll mess with your happiness. So get along with your neighbors. Get their phone numbers. Get their emails. Make sure they have your phone numbers. Make sure that you're in touch with them. You drop off Christmas cards. And if there's a concern, they'll be the first ones to tell you about it. They'll be your eyes and ear at the property at all times.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, for some neighborhoods, I'm just thinking if it's a rental area where there's a lot of, let's say, apartment buildings, I don't know, can you still get to know the neighbors?
You could still get along with the neighbors, even if they're renters next door, like maybe it's a condominium association. and there's two on either side, even townhouse, two across the street, go introduce yourself to the renters. Say, let me know if there's any concerns, and then find out who the owners of the property are, like the titled owners. Get communicating with them, because the people across the street, I just had one today. I did an eviction out in Alex last month, and we kicked the individual out. She was a senior citizen. Unfortunately, she had a drug addict for a daughter that was terrorizing the building in the neighborhood. So we got the eviction, and the plus size is there was like $1,300 owing, and I had a good conversation with the woman after we gave her a statement of account, and she made her first payment of $160 on the first. Don't have to go back to court. She's going to pay it off slowly over a year. So I mean, but what I found out tonight, the phone call I got at 5:30, he's telling me about the story about how the windows have been shot up and it's in Alex. And I was like, nah, it's just a coincidence in Alex. And he says, didn't you kick out two people out of that building across the street last month? And I said, yeah. Well, the daughter that you kicked the one out for, she's the one that's putting the holes in the window of my rental.
Oh, no.
So wouldn't it have been nice if those owners would have communicated a little better beforehand? They could have held that girl accountable a long time ago, got the police involved, better communication every day.
Yeah, we've done that sometimes in the past, but some of the properties that I own, I don't know the neighbors, but because one of them is a condo. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's really transient, but it's in Edmonton, it's in a different city, so I
Yeah,
don't know.
but even knowing the condo manager can help you out. Sit on the board, participate in the board by what we're doing here, Zoom or Skype or anything like that. Participate in this, get involved. So when somebody brings up something about your rental, you know about it right away. You're not finding out about, well, the police were here after your door got kicked in 3 days ago.
Yeah, that's not the time to find out. Not a great time to find out. For sure.
You want to know about it before it happens. Hey, they're having a party at your place. What would you like us to do? Call the cops.
So what's your thought on pets
And
and liability around that?
Well, you have to look at a situation with pets. You really have to do your homework on pets, first of all. We'll get right to the hot topic. Pit bulls, any type of bull cross terrier. A lot of tenants and a lot of landlords argue about this thing till they're blue in the face. The facts that I found out, and I dug into this huge, from Las Vegas all the way to BC to Ontario, 1 in 6 pit bull attacks, any type of bull terrier, 1 in 6 is a maim. Like there's a major lawsuit involved where somebody got maimed, an arm got torn, a face got bit. It wasn't a nip. It wasn't a $5,000 lawsuit. It was a $5 million lawsuit. Yikes. 1 in 6. So any dog can attack anyone, but pit bulls, unfortunately, 1 in 6, that's a scary number. So I just tell people flat out, I can't take that kind of liability. Even if it says in there they must have their own insurance, anybody can prove anything in a courtroom. Why would I want to be even associated with a 1 in 6? That's a scary number. And the next closest number to that is a Rottweiler at 1 in 3,000.
Yeah.
I'm okay with 1 in 3,000. Those are pretty good odds of somebody not being able to sue, because you could lose your home.
Oh yeah.
Somebody walking by and this dog goes through the fence that maybe turns out it was a rotten board that you didn't know about. Suddenly you're liable, even though they have their own insurance. You're on the lawsuit. I look at pets as not a right, but a want. A pet is something you want, not something you need. So, I mean, if you're a renter and you don't own a home, this is a want. So why are you getting a bull mastiff? Why are you getting a pit bull? You're not being responsible right off the snap. So I'm not really feeling like I want to rent to this person. I mean, I've been a pet owner all my life. I've had over a dozen cats. I've had 4 or 5 dogs. And I'm out, well, I don't know if you guys are pet owners, but I'm out in the yard for 2 months fixing my yard every spring.
Yeah, we're not pet owners. We had a neighbor down the end of the street, and he had a German Shepherd that was just a nasty dog. He was always, they've got the community mailbox right in front of their chain link fence.
Yeah.
And he also had a pit bull. So both of them, when you go out to get the mail, they were like snarling, and the German Shepherd was really a big dog. He could easily walk over the fence because their yard was on an angle. So if the dog was up on the hill, he could just, take a couple steps over. I complained to bylaws a couple times, and they said, unless the dog attacks you or bites you, we can't do anything about it. And I said, well, I don't really want to get bitten or attacked. Well, I'm going out to get my mail before I can file a complaint, before I need plastic surgery. So I don't know. as a landlord, I guess you can prevent people from not moving in with a pit bull. But,
I mean, I rented to someone recently. He had a pub. And when I phoned up the landlord of his existing place, the guy said, I don't even know the dog exists. There's no evidence of it. He says he's been living at my place for 3.5 years. And I walk into the house and talk to him, and the dog walks over, sniffs me, and then goes back down and sits on a pillow.
no, great.
And you know what? I mean, I have a dog that comes to my office. All of my clients have seen Spartacus. He's a large German Shepherd Husky cross, and he sits on that pillow and does not budge until I say so.
So
Because-
Nelda and I tend to disagree because I like pet lovers. I always think if you've got if you're responsible enough to have an animal that you'll take care of and clean up after, and I've always said that a lot of people would rather traumatize their kids by moving than traumatize their pets by moving. So you get long-term tenants with a certain level of responsibility because they will take care of their animals.
Theoretically, if
Theoretically.
they take care of their
And that
animals,
is,
because-
I was just saying about that guy with the pug. There are exceptions to the rule. There really are. There's some really great pet owners out there, but they are pet owners. The first one, they'll say, they give you all the evidence in the world. They're like, would you like to come see my home? Would you like to see a picture of the yard? But they're the first ones. I think the big thing is with pets is it's that first call that you get. They're inquiring about the place, and I'll ask the question, do you have any pets? And they go, well, I have a dog. Well, what kind of dog? Well, small dog. What kind of small dog? Well, he's some kind of cross. Well, what kind of cross? Well, he's a Staffordshire Terrier. I mean, I'm playing tennis trying to get one simple answer. I mean, if I say what kind of dog it is, oh, it's a Shepherd. Oh, it's a pug. Those are people that I'll continue talking with. But it takes me my partner, Ranchel, she giggles and laughs because she knows 3 questions. Oh my God, they've got a pit bull and they just don't want to tell them. I mean, if they're not being honest on the phone interview, what kind of tenants are these in the first place?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I found that a lot of people they'll never give you a number, because I never say, do you have any pets? I say, how many pets do you have? Because a lot of people.
It's like you're
I
playing
don't
it's like you're playing
I
a
don't view
game.
my dog as a pet. I view my dog as a,
It's my
child,
child, yeah.
and it's
Well,
like,
and then I'll ask even more questions. I'll be like, so what's happened to this animal? What does this animal do? What does this 30 to 50 pound animal do when you're not home? Well, I don't know. Well, do you kennel them? Well, I would never put my dog in a kennel. I'm like, so who's watching the animal? It's a 5-year-old child. Well, I don't know. Well, probably not going to work out for me. If they're kennel trained, or else I say to them, like, well, where does your animal defecate? And they're like, well, I just let them in the backyard. Wrong answer. I'm sorry, but do I walk up to your house and poop in your backyard? No. I know the large majority of pet owners do not clean up after themselves.
I see, this is what I
Yeah.
agree with, because I rented out one of my properties and they had a pet, and of course everyone always tells you they're neat and tidy, blah, blah, blah. And actually I hadn't rented out to those tenants myself. I had hired a property manager, which is a whole other story in and of itself. But when I went to take back the property and I looked at the backyard, there's dog feces everywhere. And I just thought, come on, if I'm allowing your dog into this property, the least you can do is clean up after it. But a lot of people don't really think it's a big deal. It's not their yard, maybe they
Well,
don't.
and you'll hear the argument back. Well, why, you knew I had a dog. Why did you rent to me then? You're like, really? That's your excuse for my backyard looking like a minefield? That's like saying I have children. That's why there's felt markers all over the wall. And I've had parents say that. Well,
Oh, yeah.
I have a child. Of course they write on the walls. And I'm looking at these parents going, no, they don't. Children don't write on walls. They do it once. They get one of these and the problem's solved.
Yeah, none of my nephews are great nephews.
You know,
Write on the walls. Yep.
I mean, my partner, we all moved in with 3 kids that were in their late teens. And I walked in on one of my partner's kids and I see him about to drill holes in the wall. I'm like, what are you doing? Well, I'm drilling holes. Do you own those walls? Do you own those walls? Well, no. Are you planning on fixing those walls when we leave? Well, I don't know. I'm like, how about we just put those on with stickers? How about we not drill holes in my walls? But the problem is nowadays, there's so many self-entitled kids that their parents have never said no to them.
Yeah.
And we in this industry are getting to deal with them. We're having to educate other people's children like, no, you can't do that. And they're like, but why? Why can't I leave 9 bags of garbage on the front step? Then they've got this horrible, and I'm not saying all people, this is my worst case scenario, this self-entitled group. I have 40-year-old parents calling me up. Are you evicting my child? And I'm like, yeah. Why? I'm like, they haven't paid rent in 3 months. Well, they said they did. I'm like, well, they're lying to you. They
Yeah,
don't have.
we've had to deal with helicopter
Like,
parents.
what do you mean they don't have? I'll be like, what do you mean they don't have parties? The police were there with 2 paddy wagons 2 nights ago. The front window's missing. Like, parents are utterly in shock when someone else starts parenting their children.
Yeah.
Not my snowflake.
Yeah.
I've had
I've
parents
had-
make threats.
I've had the helicopter parents who come in. I know when I was looking for my first place to live, I would have just died if my parents would have come with me because I wanted to be independent and be an adult and all that kind of stuff. And it's actually pretty commonplace to have people come with the parents these days and have parents ask the questions. And we had one person who had applied for a condominium and she didn't qualify financially. Like her wages and were, I think, $1,900 and her rent was $2,000. And so I remember going back to her and saying, theoretically, this is the actual number, saying, well, how are you going to afford this? Because you still have a cell phone bill, you've got a car, you've got car payments, you've got student loans. And she said, well, my parents helped me out a little bit. And I said, well, could we get them to co-sign the application for me? She said, well, I'll talk to them when they come home. So when they came home and she called me back and she was in a real tizzy and she said, I shouldn't have to co-sign. I'm not buying a property, blah, blah, blah. My parents said this, my parents said that. And I thought, if I was like 25, 26 years old and my parents had called and talked to the potential property managers and said, my child shouldn't have to do this, I would have just died. I would have been mortified.
Oh.
Seems to be not the case these days.
No, it's just a very self-entitled generation. And it's not the kid's fault. It's the parents. The parents have created the problem. And a lot of times these same parents, they're still renting. Like they're still renting. I've had 50-year-old parents and their kids live down the street and their kids are living down the street. And I'm like, nobody's taking that next step. They're renters for life. I mean, that's great for property owners. But I mean, I enjoy when I see my tenants make the transition to buy a home. It means I've helped with that transition. I've helped them become responsible tenants. I've helped them become contributing members to a property, the upkeep of a property. And now they want it because they're taking pride in your rental.
Yeah, great. That's a great attitude.
It is. And not only that, but they also have the opportunity to start buying other properties and turning into the same person that you are.
Exactly. And I even had a case, the woman yesterday that we evicted that has to be out on Friday. I phoned her. I always phone after the cases. I'll phone the losing party, and most times it's losing against me, like 99%. And I'll try and clear the air. Is there anything you don't understand about the order? Do you understand that you have to be out on noon on Friday? And I'm met with hostility pretty much all the time. Sometimes I get hung up on. Sometimes they call me back because they want to see what I had to say. And I'm just laying it out how the week's going to go. I'm like, okay, the owners are coming by on Thursday to do an inspection on the property, and then they're going to come by on Friday to do the move out at noon. Is there going to be a problem? Well, what if I'm not out by Friday at noon? I'm like, well, then there's going to be a problem. And I basically said they're coming by to see how you're doing on Thursday and to see the condition of the property and what they may or may not need to bring with them on Friday to start working immediately, or they may not have to at all. And she absolutely started cursing and swearing at me and everything else. And so, okay, she's taking it pretty personal. I did a little bit of research on the woman and what she does for a living. And I messaged her back and said, I'm not going to accept any more of your phone calls if you're going to drop the F-bomb on me. But here's the rule of thumb. If you don't allow them access on Thursday, I noticed that you're running an illegal property management company in Lethbridge. I said, I will draw so much attention to that if you don't cooperate with this order that was made and cooperate with the legislation, that I'm just going to take a personal interest in you. And I get this phone call, screaming match, and I hung up on her again. And then she phoned or texted me, apologized for her behavior, says, please don't involve the real estate commission in this. And the owners can come by at noon, and on Friday, I'll have everything out. And I wasn't like extorting or threatening. I'm just saying, look, I don't need to take a personal interest in your life. I can help you, or I can make things a lot worse for you. And then I'll drop things and like olive branches, like, have you phoned 211? Well, what's that? Well, that's a really good income line that can help you with emergency assistance for moving, security deposit, finding a place to live. Have you phoned the Braden Institute? They might be able to help you with a security deposit and helping your utilities get hooked up. And now I've turned the entire situation from an animosity role into, wow, I didn't know about all these resources. Oh, and I have a U-Haul franchise, so I always throw that in there. If you need a U-Haul, let me know and I can get it set up for you.
Oh, that's great. So this was someone who was working as a property manager and she was not paying her bills and she was swearing at
No,
you?
she's, I don't even know what to call her company. It's some kind of relocation company
Okay.
for seniors. And she's not licensed and she's operating in a gray area and she knows it. So I mean, I don't really draw attention to her, but I mean, if you're living in a glass house, you probably shouldn't throw stones around me.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Because
Yes.
my sister said it a long time ago that I'm probably the last person in the world you want my undivided attention.
That's great. So my last question, you had said dealing with law enforcement was a subject you wanted to bring up. So tell us about dealing with law enforcement.
Well, law enforcement can be a blessing and a curse. You're going to have officers that know the law and you're going to have officers that don't know the law, but they think they do. And that's the worst ones. And no, there is not one police officer anywhere in the world that wants a civilian telling them that they're wrong and they're providing the right legislation. Ramming it down an officer's throat, that's how I used to do it. Didn't make a lot of friends doing it. Still don't make a lot of friends doing it because, I mean, I'm a lot softer now when a landlord does something that I suggested and the tenant cries wolf and the RCMP or city police phone me because the landlord said for them to call us, I'm the agent. It usually starts out with it's a 50-50 mix. I could tell an officer, maybe he's from Quebec, they have quite a different view on tenancy laws out there. They're a lot more pro-tenant. So you've got an officer from out of province that thinks that his legislation carries over to our province, and I have to educate the officer politely. Tell him where the legislation is, how it can be found. I'd say about 7 out of 10 of the officers take it with a grain of salt and they're okay with it. There's always 1 or 2 that, you know, they're grumpy about it, but they'll get back to me if I'm wrong. And they never get back to me because they find out I'm not wrong and it's not a criminal matter, it's civil, so they can't get involved. But then there's that 1 out of 10 that I might have to take it as far as a watch commander, a superintendent. I might have to go to the commission that files for complaints against law enforcement in Canada because the officer made claims over the phone. You know, if he didn't get his way, that he was going to come and put me in jail, or he's going to put my lawyers in jail, or my landlords in jail, or the tenant in jail, because he's trying to enforce legislation from out of province that doesn't apply here. So usually when it goes a little sideways like that, and it can happen, you have to be prepared. You have to know the legislation. Like you can't have a basic understanding. You need an advanced understanding, because now that law enforcement is going to go to their legal department and they're going to try and spin that interpretation to their end, because officers don't like to be wrong. So whenever you're dealing with law enforcement, a soft hand is much more effective than a big stick. I mean, even though you're right, you want the officer to discover it on his own. You kind of lead him to water like you're leading a horse. You can't make him drink. You'll be like, oh, well, honestly, officer, I'm pretty sure in subsection 18A of the Residential Tenancy Act, it states that we can go in for an emergency measures, and we've had a complaint from the people below that there's water dumping. So that's why we went in there. And they're like, well, what section was that? 18A. Can I screenshot it and send it to you? Can I email it to you in the morning? Can I help you out in any way? Because I don't think this is a criminal matter. This is a civil proceeding. If this person wants to complain, they can file a complaint with the Residential Tenancy Board. This is not a criminal matter as they follow the law. And usually the officer by then will have a copy of it, or he'll start to get a basic understanding. Oh, well, where's this? Page 17 of the Act. As long as I tell everyone, print out that 100+ pages of the Act, put it in a binder, and have a highlighter and a notepad, like a little Post-it, because you want, if you looked at my binder, it looks ridiculous. It looks like the playbook for the Dallas Cowboys. There's plays and referrals to the other parts of the Act. There's a Minstrels Act. There's the Residential Tenancies Act. There's the Mobile Home Act, and I'm bouncing all over the place. Because you have officers that might be partially educated and think they know what they're doing. And they're like, yeah, you're right in that sense, but this actually doesn't apply here. They're like, what? No, this doesn't apply here. And I can tell you why. And then again, you send the legislation, you don't force it down their throat. Because as soon as you put an officer, like if you start telling a law enforcement, you need to do something, yeah, they won't do anything. They won't do anything at all. They do not like being told what they have to do. And I mean, my partner didn't believe about this 3 out of 10 guys that are a little off when they get shown. And she'd be like, oh, well, you showed them the legislation. You were polite about it. What's the problem? Why are they so upset? And I was like, well, why don't you come out and meet these officers? And she can't believe the way the officers talk to you in person when they're on site. And at the end of the day, they have a gun. You don't.
Yeah,
So,
and a taser. And
you know, you got to be nice. If they say, wait in your car and I'll go check it out, you're like, well, here's the keys. Enjoy yourself. But when you are dealing with law enforcement, each tenancy should have a file. And if law enforcement is involved, get the officer's name and a file number. There's always a file number if they've been called.
okay.
And that way, and record the interactions with the officer for your own safety and protection. Same thing with tenants. You're interacting with a drunk tenant, you get an audio, you get a video. People, or a witness, people lie all the time. Especially when they're facing an eviction, then it comes out. Like the one I told you about earlier, the woman claiming the realtor walked in when she was naked. You know, could you imagine if she went public with something like that, and that poor realtor, his career would be over.
Oh yeah, it's all over. It would be all over the news fairly quickly.
It wouldn't matter that he did nothing wrong or that there was 24 hours notice. And that's why I came down so hard in the hearing, is because I've been on the receiving end of a ridiculous accusation of oh, well, my landlord sexually harasses me. And I'm just like, what? Where did that come from? It just comes out of the blue. And it happens more often than not nowadays, where I've had tenants say that about my client, the landlord. Oh, he's so inappropriate. He comes over here without his wife, and I will jump in and interrupt. That's the only time I'll interrupt, when somebody's saying something that's so malicious or so detrimental to their reputation. I stop that right there. I'm like, no. Unless they have actual physical evidence or a police file complaint, this is complete hearsay, and I'm going to object to this strenuously. And the hearing officer has to give it a thought, like, and she's going to say, do you have a police file number? Well, no. So you didn't phone the police when you were being sexually harassed by your landlord? Well, no. Why not? That sounds pretty serious. And it wasn't in the evidence package. This is like a Hail Mary by a tenant.
Okay.
It happens probably 1 out of 20 with female tenants, where they will make some kind of sexual innuendo claim about their landlord now because they're losing in court. And it just comes right off the lips, like it shouldn't even be there.
Okay. Wow.
So
Which also sort of, like, the evil of that is people who are actually dealing with those issues are now diminished because you have all this other, the nonsense that people are listening to.
Exactly. So I shut it down. And I mean, I had a case last month where one of my process servers is actually my son. He's an MMA fighter. He's very 5'10", and he's built like an Italian supermodel. He's just jacked all the time. And he served a document to these people. And one of the other fighters in Central Alberta was their son. Well, during the service, everything went fine. He posted on the door. The guy yipped at him a bit. He drove away. During the hearing, the gentleman said that my son showed up in his MMA gear, mouth guard, and his gloves on. And we could stop this right now. And she's like, pardon me, the arbitrator. I said, my son does not walk around in his MMA gear, and I find it offensive. And if they feel that he was acting in any type of a threatening manner, they need to contact the RCMP immediately. And I said, we're not even discussing this anymore. And I says, as a matter of fact, as soon as this hearing's over, I'm going to be downloading the footage of when he left, his car video, and when he came back, to showing what he was dressed and wearing. And I'm going to file a complaint myself. So I beat them to the punch. And sure enough, I had an officer go over there, and he made it very clear to them that they made any type of accusation like that, he was going to charge them with mischief.
Oh, good.
And it was probably the first time that somebody held these people accountable.
Yeah.
I always found at the ends of tenancies, tenants might be pretty good up until the very end of the tenancy. And then if things, they're short of cash, they feel a little trapped financially, and all of a sudden all this weird behavior comes out of the woodwork, and they're threatening to sue me for this, and they're threatening just like, what the heck? And I found the best way to deal with it is not being emotional. Just give them the facts. Like, and that's a guy who was just constantly harassing us at the end. That the landlord wanted to sell her condominium, And so he had to leave because she was selling it at the end of his fixed term lease. So, he had to move out at noon on the end of the tenancy date. And he was just he would get part of the RTA that somebody told him and he'd turn it into something else. He was creating all of these fictitious laws. That
There was, yeah, it was quite bizarre actually to listen to this guy talk, because we basically said, you have to leave. And his response was, I don't want to, and I don't have to. And the law says I don't. And we basically said, well, actually, your tenancy ends on this date, and so you don't have a choice. The property is being sold. And his response was, no, I can stay here as long as I want.
I know my rights, but no, I don't think you do.
And you'd be surprised. And like, that was actually one good point you made there, how emotional and how unsettling it can be when somebody says these things. And that's the benefit of having an agent in the room. Because I've seen people's reaction when something like that gets says, like a horrible accusation. I will put the phone on mute and I'll turn them, it's okay, the phone's muted. Don't worry about it. I've got this. I see the way you're reacting. There's no evidence in the package to support this accusation. I will tear this right out of this entire hearing in just a moment. Don't yell at them. Don't interrupt them. Let them dig a hole. And then I take the phone back off mute and I respond to that accusation very, very clearly on, if this was a situation, they should have phoned the police. There's nothing to support this. This is a last minute Hail Mary that they're hoping for to try and influence the judge because they know they're on a sinking ship.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and you can't do that if you're personally involved. And how could you not be personally involved? Your husband and wife, if we were having a hearing right now and I made an accusation, I was a female and I made an accusation that, oh, your husband was taking pictures of me when I was in the shower, you would go right off the side of your chair. I would do the same. My partner would do the same. And emotion is the worst thing that you can bring into a hearing. It's a business.
Or even during move-out inspections, emotion's not a good thing to come in. The same guy we're talking about when we did is, we were both present for the move-out inspection. And the dad was trying to pull Gil into an argument about how Gil didn't follow the proper procedure for telling him he had to leave. And then the dad chimed in and said something about, do you want this to get physical? And I said, stop, that's enough. You're leaving, we're finishing this, you're going out of here. So that was, I'm a little person, by the way, I'm 5'3". But I just thought the dad was acting ridiculous. He was about the same height as I was. And I thought, if push came to shove, Gil's 6'3". He's a little bit.
Because it's this self-entitled.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And there's little quirks too. I mean, you could be in a hearing and something is said by your client that they didn't tell you. My expression is like, you didn't mention that. And then I have to take like a brief recess because I don't know the answer to that question of something a tenant brought up. And I have to be able to, I'm not going to lie for them. I'm just going to put it in a way that's going to be as least damaging to them as I can, because mistakes happen.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's part of the industry. I've made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
We do. Yes.
And I mean, if I get a landlord that's calling me, I've turned down landlords. They'll call me and say this and this and this and this happened. I'm like, yeah, man, we could have a hearing. We could terminate the tenancy, but it's not going to work in your favor. I'm going to get the tenancy terminated, but when they come after you for damages, they're going to win. It's not a matter of how much they're going to. It's not a matter of when they're going to win. It's how much. Because you cannot be emotional. You can't lock people out. You can't make threats.
No.
You can't turn off. You can't have the city turn off their water. You can't break into the home and steal the appliances. Even though you feel justified, you can't do these things.
No, you have to follow the rules. It's best to follow the rules, to take the emotion out of it. You could go and bang your pillow afterwards or like have a really good game of tennis or hockey, but not good to do that during an actual conversation.
No, and you really have to be smart about the action you take when it comes to those kind of decisions, because landlords do get fined, and they get fined pretty heavily if they don't follow.
And the fines aren't even the biggest thing to be concerned about. I mean, right now I'm taking on a case for a tenant. They moved in and the property management company, and it was licensed, their maintenance person painted over top of mold.
Oh, boy.
Really?
They didn't open the wall to see where the mold was coming from. It was a hot water heater, and they pulled the water heater out of it. They painted behind it. They put the cover back on. And these people lived there for 5 months. Their cat got sick. They got sick. Their baby got sick. And I
Oh,
mean, I'm going to be going after, I mean, the tenant got a little ridiculous. They were trying to sue for 50 grand. And I talked the tenants down saying, you know what, you could have moved. At the end of the day, you could have just up and moved. There was lots of places you decided to stay. So you got to ask yourself, are they going to be responsible for your cat bills? Probably not. Are they going to be responsible for your medical bills? No, because we have Alberta healthcare. You guys probably didn't pay any out-of-pocket expenses. So what are you out? 5 months of living in a thing. So I'm going to be asking for 5 months of abatement of rent. And I'm including in the action, I've added the property manager's name to it. So the owners can go after the property managers when they're done, because it wasn't really the property manager's fault, but they were being irresponsible, not knowing what their property managers were doing.
yeah. You mean it wasn't the property owner's fault, but the property manager?
Yeah, it wasn't the property owner's fault. It was the property manager.
Yeah.
And
Gotcha.
I mean, I'm going to give them, I mean, I have everybody talking now. I mean, the court case isn't until January. I had it adjourned because I wanted to talk the tenant off the cliff of $50,000 claim and 13 binders of evidence. It was getting a little ridiculous. I got her down to 30 pages and about a $5,000 or $6,000 claim. And now the landowners are seeing the proper evidence package. They see that it's the property managers and they're giving it some thought. So, I mean, we may never go to court. It might be, I might just phone and say, we've settled out of court. We've got a conditional order. I'll ask for a brief hearing to make the order. And then they owe the tenants $5 grand. They pay them within 30 days. And if they don't pay them within 30 days, I put a lien on the property for the tenants. And then they're able to go, they're able to go after the property managers for that, for being incompetent.
Yeah. And that's a big claim to file.
Yeah, I mean, and
Anyway,
again,
I'm going to kind of wrap this up a little bit. So if you were going to give property owners, landlords, just kind of like an overarching piece of advice about the RTDRS, what would your advice be?
my advice to every property owner, as soon as you buy a home or you're thinking about buying a home, you go print out the act and put it in a binder and get ready to read that thing over and over and over again, like it's the Bible and you're going to church once a week for it. You need to know that act. I mean, we have a page.
I really like what you said, because somebody, you know, when we were property managers, I would always say to people after they'd signed up with us, I'd say, do you know the RTA? No, I've never heard of it. You need a copy of it. I'd give them a copy and they'd say, well, if I have questions, I'll just ask you. And I said, when you're in crisis, that is not the time to be looking for answers. You need to know that information so that you don't get into crisis. Or if you are in crisis, you know what to do. But yes, I really love what you said about the Bible and the RTA and study it like you're going to Sunday school.
So you've got the RTA, you've got minimum housing standards, which is another really good one. Human rights is another very important one.
FOIP and PIPEDA.
Yeah. And I'll make a comment on those. I posted on our page the other day to throw out the points and procedures, to throw out the consumer guides, the help guides. Those are all not the Residential Tenancy Act, and they will not hold up in a hearing. They're a good guide just to do a quick reference kind of thing. Maybe tenants read them, but at the end of the day, those will not hold up in a courtroom. They're not legislation. When you walk into a courtroom or a hearing, you have to quote the legislation on how it applies to your situation. And those consumer guides written by Service Alberta were probably written by a committee of social workers that interpreted it the way that they felt it was.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, they're a good quick reference, but don't use them as a Bible. Your Bible is that Residential Tenancy Act. It's actually have you ever bought a self-help book?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the RTA is the self-help book for residential tenancy matters. So you read it over and over and over again. I learn something every time I read it. Oh, I didn't realize that might apply in this situation every time.
That is really good to hear. Someone who's been doing this for 25 years, been representing people in court, you know, since 1994, and you still get something new out of the RTA.
Oh,
I would say your love affair with the RTA has been ongoing.
Yeah, that would be a good. It's like
love-hate relationship, I'm sure.
A love-hate relationship, yeah.
Your average relationship.
Average. I mean, I've got a hearing officer, not a hearing officer, but an interesting one. In Alberta, you've heard of the Community Law Foundation, the Community Legal Society. They provide free lawyers for people in trouble. Well, they recently, 2 years ago, branched in Calgary, Edmonton, Grand Prairie, Red Deer, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat. They now have paralegals one paralegal for each office that helps tenants for free.
Uh-huh.
The best part, and the best part about them is, and I'm going to go on record as saying it, they're not very good.
Yeah. You need to know, the RTA, like regular law is different than real estate law, and especially
100%.
tenant law. There are big differences in here. So you
And make sure you refer to it that way. I used to research, because I was a licensed realtor at one time, so I used to call it the realtor laws, and it's not. The Residential Tenancy Act is completely independent of the Real Estate Act. It's completely independent.
Yep.
And saying, I mean, there's a lot of realtors that think they know what they're doing, and I probably get a phone call 3 to 4 times a week from realtors saying, hey, how can I do this and this and this? Because I've got a tenant in there. I'm like, well, you can't.
Yeah.
You can do this and this and this, and you tell your clients that they're going to have to suck this up because this is the law. There's no gray area anymore. They've closed those loopholes. They've made sure that realtors can't take advantage of tenants.
And at the same time, we're actually in Alberta, as landlords, better off than most of the rest of the country, because the laws here do tend somewhat to favor the landlord, but you still have to follow those rules.
You do.
I don't know.
At this point, we're running over time.
Oh.
I would like to thank Robert Bonin of Red Deer Recoveries. And have you got your website up and running, Robert?
No, soon it will be. We actually just got the building painted. We've got some brochures coming, new business cards. I'm getting a lot of static from the local MLAs and MPs to have some of my brochures in their office. And I'm planning on running for MLA, and I'm going to go after the Service Alberta Minister's position next year. The guy that's the boss of the boss of the boss of the RTA.
Oh, that would be most excellent.
I'm looking forward to that.
I would really love it if you got him. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. It's been very enlightening. I always learn something new from our guests, and I've certainly learned a ton from you, Robert. And I would like to tell our audience, if you like this live session, like us on Facebook. Share these Facebook videos with everyone that you think needs them and people who don't need them. And these videos are also going to be on my YouTube channel, which is Nelda Schulte. And you can like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And you can also find me on Twitter at Nelda Helps Me. So if you'd like to have access to free landlording resources such as maintenance checklists, landlord forums, and videos, these are on my free membership site. So you just click on the green membership button on my website, neldaschulte.com, and you can have access to everything. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you very much to our special guest, Robert Bonin.
Yes.
And Robert, you really provide a fantastic service.
You've been tremendous fun to talk to. So I'm looking forward to
always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.